Hi, I'm Jennifer Hollick with the World War II Research and Writing Center and Finding the Answers Journey. I'm sitting in Amsterdam this morning in the woods along a lake, and I thought I would talk a little bit about Reconstruction and what that means for 20th century military research, whether we're talking about World War I, World War II, Korea, or Vietnam. A lot of people associate the word Reconstruction with the fire at National Personnel Record Center in 1973 in St. Louis. And that's true. If the service file, that OMPF, official military personnel file, did burn, then yes, they tell you they will try to reconstruct it. And what that means, if you send a request to St. Louis, is that they're probably going to give you a final payroll record, which often doesn't have enough for you to get started on actual research. If the soldier died in service, they might send you a few pieces of his IDPF, but they won't send you the whole thing unless you specifically ask for it. And they might send you some hospital admission index sheets, which again don't have a useful unit on there or anything to really help you reconstruct service history beyond knowing that they were wounded or sick. So when you work with a researcher or you go to St. Louis to do the research yourself, you have to do the reconstruction of the service history yourself. And what does this mean? Well, reconstruction means a couple different things. As I said, for the Army and the Army Air Forces, we have to basically build the service history from a lot of alternate resources. If you have someone who served in the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, or the Merchant Marines, those files survived the fire. They were not affected. I think like 0.5% of them were. So even when you have a full service file, you're still reconstructing service because the answers are not all in the service file in a clear and concise way that you can say, okay, I totally understand that my Marine went from this unit to this base, to that place, to this ship, to this battle. You have all of those pieces in there, but you have to create the timeline and you have to make sense of the information that's there. So in essence, we're all reconstructing service. And it's the same process for World War I, World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam War. Everything you learn that you read on my website or in my books or through my videos or programs about World War II applies to all of those wars. So when we do reconstruction of military service, one of the first things you want to do, and I'll put some links with this video of articles that I've already written and books and online courses so that you have some additional resources, but it's the first thing you need to do is create that timeline of service. You can do that in Excel. I do it in Word in a table format, and it's basically the same thing you would do for your genealogy when you're building a timeline for a person's life. You're just focusing more on what happened to them in the military. When did they enlist? When were they part of active duty? When did they go overseas? When did they come back? What battles were they in? And then when you start digging into the Army and Army Air Force morning reports and payroll records and monthly reports, where exactly were they? And no matter what branch you're working on, it's not enough to take the discharge paper that you get or a report of death out of a death file that shows the final unit, because that unit is almost never the only unit someone was in. I recently did a project where someone was in one unit the entire war. And actually, not the entire war. From the time he went overseas until he was wounded in December of 1944, he was in one unit in the 84th Infantry Division. Now this is rare that someone in combat stays in the same unit. I finished another project recently where a gentleman served in the 10th Mountain Division in Italy. And what's interesting is he had 4 weeks in that division. And what showed up on his, there are lots of birds here this morning. It's beautiful. My heron was here a little while ago. The 10th Mountain Division soldier actually transferred out of that division in the summer of 1945 and into the 2nd Infantry Division. So what's on his discharge paper is the 2nd Infantry Division, but he never saw combat with that unit. So you have to take these final units and work backward through the morning reports, through the other records that are available to figure out where were they. Because when you just assume that that unit is the whole story, you're almost always going to get the story wrong. Now, the 10th Mountain Division man was kind of unusual because, again, he transferred into the 2nd Division at the end of the war for discharge. Prior to that, he served in the 10th, and he only saw 4 weeks of combat, so he transferred into that in the middle of April. Prior to that, he was stationed in Italy, but he went through 3 different replacement depots before he was put into combat once he got overseas. And prior to that, he served stateside in another unit. So we can't just take, again, what's on that discharge paper or that death file and say that's the whole story, because it almost never is. So whether you're working with a researcher or you're doing the reconstruction yourself, you need to make sure that you're doing your homework, you're putting the timeline together, and that you're not taking one piece of information for granted, because you'll end up wasting a lot of time and money pulling records that have nothing to do with your soldier's story. And the same thing goes, as I said, for Marine Corps, Navy, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marines. You need to understand when they were in a particular unit, when they were on a particular ship or station, who they were attached to, because all of that influences their military history. So if you have questions about this, I will post links with this video in this article. And if you would like some help to reconstruct your servicemen's history for any of our 20th century wars, and would like to maybe even go a little bit deeper to know more than just the basics, let me know. I'm happy to set up a free consultation with you where we can discuss the information that you have and everything that's possible, because we always find the answers at the World War II Research and Writing Center.